The following incident took place in 1974 in a small town called Langenburg in the Canadian province of Saskatchewan. The town is located around 8 miles west of the Manitoba border and about 130 miles north of North Dakota. Langenberg is a flat and open prairie and is known for its wheat production. Most of the residents in the locality are all farmers or other agricultural workers. Between midnight on Saturday, August the 31st and 3 a.m. on Sunday the 1st of September 1974, in a typical rainy autumn weather, a babysitter was in a farmhouse and became disturbed by the sounds of dogs barking and growling outside. The babysitter was concerned because the dogs were normally quiet and passive, and she feared that something or somebody was prowling around outside. The nearest farmhouse to the property was owned by the Fuhr family, and the following morning around 10 a.m, the family were preparing to go to church, except for the father, Edwin Fuhr, who had to attend to chores around the farm. As the family were leaving for church, Edwin had jumped on a tractor and headed to the field, as he was preparing to harvest the rapeseed crop. The field was located about 1,500 feet from their farmhouse and 5.5 miles from Langenburg. He'd been operating his tractor for about 1 hour and was approaching a wetland, where he then slowed down to check his position. He could see that he was about 75 feet from the wetland and had to stop the tractor as the ground was becoming too soft. As Edwin was looking around, he spotted what looked like a dome-shaped object about 50 feet away from him, and at first believed it must have been a metal goose blind that hunters use for duck hunting. He then figured his neighbour was playing a joke on him, so he figured he'd creep up to the object and scare him instead. He then jumped off of his tractor and slowly walked up to the object, and as he got to around 15 feet, he noticed that the grass around it was moving, and was close enough to see that the object was spinning at high speed. Now extremely hesitant, he quickly backed away from the object and did not take his eyes off it until he reached his tractor. As he climbed aboard his tractor, he now had a better vantage point and was shocked to find that there was not just one spinning object, but 4 other similar objects to the left of the tractor. Edwin Fuhr was now frozen in fear and was so terrified he could not move, and not knowing what to do, sat there for around 20 minutes. While sitting on his tractor, he could only stare at the 5 spinning objects, who all appeared to be hovering and were about 18 inches above the ground, and all were arranged in an arc around the wetland. As he studied them closer, he observed that they appeared to be metal-like brushed stainless steel. The domes themselves had darker grooves and were dark grey, like they'd been hot but were now cooling down, but no other surface details were visible. Each of the objects were around 5 feet in height and about 11 feet in diameter. Each disc had a bottom lip that was a different shade to the rest of the body. One of the discs was more active than the other 4, and Edwin could not work out what was happening, but then saw what looked like a small probe extending out of the object onto the grass. Still frightened, he attempted to put the tractor into gear and get away from the object, but found he could not move the throttle or the steering wheel. He could not work out whether the tractor was generally inoperable or whether he was so panicked that fear had removed all of his strength. Not knowing what move to make next, the objects one by one suddenly rose in the air in a step formation, where the closest object to where he was seated appeared to lead the others. The objects rose in the air and suddenly stopped when they were about 200 feet above the ground. The whole operation was done in a split second. If you'd blinked, you'd have missed the takeoff, but they abruptly stopped in the sky. As Edwin continued to look up in amazement, he saw a grey vapour shoot out from the underside of each object, followed by a strong downward blast of wind, and the pressure from the blast caused the grass and crop around Edwin and the tractor to flatten, resulting in him having to grab his hat to stop it blowing off of his head. Edwin Fuhr then thought, well, there goes my crop. The objects remained in the air for several minutes, then ascended further into the clouds before vanishing. Still in total shock, Edwin just sat in his tractor, waiting for them to return, and when they did not come back, he jumped off of his tractor and walked towards where the objects had been. As he walked around, he found 5 rings of compressed grass that swirled in a clockwise direction, but fortunately were not dead and did not appear to have heated or charred in any way. Inside one of the rings were probe marks where the grass was laid flat in 3-foot-long strips leading away from the ring on one side. In the silence, he could hear the distant sounds of cattle that seemed agitated in a neighbour's field. When he later spoke to the neighbour, he was told that the cattle had been so disturbed that they'd actually broken the fence in 3 places to escape. After the strange and terrifying episode, Edwin continued with his farming, while at the same time mulling over in his mind what had happened to him that morning. When his family returned from church, they found Edwin extremely worked up and was not eating, claiming he was not hungry. After they questioned him about his loss of appetite, he finally came clean and told his family what he'd seen that morning. He then grabbed the stainless steel bowl and turned it over onto the table, stating that is what it looked like. His family found it hard to believe his story, so he took them out to the location where everything had taken place. His father was amazed at the marks left and spent the afternoon crawling on his hands and knees observing them. They later called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to see if they'd received any eyewitness claims, but they had nothing on their books. However, following day on September the 2nd, their dogs started barking excitedly, and one of the dogs that liked to roam freely throughout the farm refused to go anywhere near where the objects had landed. On September the 3rd, Edwin found a 6th circle in the same formation, and on the evening of September the 14th, the dogs again barked, and the following morning Edwin found a 7th circle on the ground, forming an arc with the other 6 circles. Then additional rings were found near Peoples, Lake Lenore, and Dinsmore, Saskatchewan, where over the next few weeks 15 circles in all were found in wheat fields. An expert was called out to photograph and measure the ring circles and realised that it was not a hoax. All details were then sent to the National Research Council of Canada. A man called Dr. Alan McNamara from the NRC was a skeptic and believed the idea of strange objects was ridiculous and believed the rings on the ground were just fairy rings. A fairy ring is caused by an individual fungus growing underground. However, the rings on Edwin Firth's farm were uncharacteristic of fairy rings, as the rings were uniform in size and geometry and would be untenable in nature. It was later found that there were more circles found in the immediate area and throughout Saskatchewan, and some of these were in cultivated crops. So, what did Edwin Firth encounter in 1974? As there appears no doubt that he came across 5 bowl-shaped objects. Were they controlled by intelligent beings? And if so, why were they there?